Welcome everybody to this last in the series of our learning events. Really wanted to say a massive thank you to all our speakers who have joined us over the last few months. We started this in January. We've heard so many great stories and so grateful for everybody's time that they've given us, just sharing their knowledge and inspiration really that has led to, we have now over 1,000 medals have been awarded since we started in November. And as I keep on saying, and apologies if I'm repeating myself, behind every single medal is a piece of reconditioning activity that is going on around the country. I just think that's just an amazing piece of work. So thank you to everybody who's partaken in these learning events, but also who's been inspired and continuing the work through these learning events as well. So thank you. Today, we're so pleased to be able to welcome Professor Adam Gordon, who's president of the British Geriatrics Society, and Kate Tantam, who many of you know from a rehab legends work across the country over the last few years. So really looking forward to hearing from Adam, and just want to recognise all the work that particularly Kate has done over the years as well. I mean, we know there are many people who have gone before us in this work. This is not new. We know the work of the deconditioning games last year. We know MPJ paralysis, and we also know about #RehabLegends. And when I first met Kate 6 months or so ago now, really blown away by her enthusiasm and energy around the campaign that she'd been leading for some time now, and we if we get the chance to amplify some of that, then great, but also to collaborate where we can as well. So it is recognizing that all this work that we're doing now is building on other people's work as well. So thank you to Kate and all her work, and we'll hear a great presentation from Kate shortly. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Professor Adam Gordon, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. So the floor is yours, Adam.
Okay, I'm just going to share my slides. Give me a second. Just find the right one. There's always a challenge, isn't it? Which of the windows is the one that you want to open? Here we are, got it here. Right, so hopefully you can now see my slide set.
Yeah.
Not the one that says conclusion, so that's kind of giving away the thunder, isn't it? Let's go back to the beginning. That's a very good place to start. Right. Sorry, my computer's being a little bit sluggish. This sometimes happens on Teams. Here we go. Right. So I know that Kate's probably going to give you lots of really good practical examples of rehab legends in practice. So what I wanted to do is actually to take the opportunity to take a sort of step back and have a little bit of systems thinking about how we put the systems in place that we need in order to make sure that we can provide people with proactive and anticipatory care to prevent them becoming deconditioned in the first place, and also effective rehabilitation to sort of recover them when they have deteriorated as a consequence of an acute illness. So I'm going to talk about a document that the British Geriatrics Society has recently developed called Joining the Dots, and this is a British Geriatrics Society blueprint to develop evidence-based care for older people. For those of you that don't know about the BGS, we're a membership organisation. We started it as a group of geriatricians, but over the past decade and a half, we've really morphed into a multidisciplinary society. We have over 4,800 members now, all with an interest in care of older people, with the fastest growing groups being amongst nurses, therapists, GPs and care home staff. So we remain predominantly geriatricians, but rapidly becoming much more multidisciplinary. And hopefully the sort of ideas that I'm going to present to you here will be sufficiently broad-based to represent that group. If you indulge me a little bit,
Adam, can I just jump in? We can't see slides at the moment. I'm not sure if you're sharing slides.
All right, okay, you should be able to see slides. Let me just see what's going on. What can you see?
Not a shared screen at the moment, nothing at the moment, just normal Teams.
Right, let me just see if I can try again. I think I know what happened when my computer went on a go slow. It was obviously just disconnecting and reconnecting. Let me just try again. Here we are. Oh no. Give me a moment. I'm out of application memory, which is weird because I just did a presentation on a different meeting and it worked beautifully. What can you see now? Anything?
A blank screen at the moment.
Okay, I'm going to try one more time. Share. Let's just try sharing the screen, see if that works better. Can you see yourself?
Yeah, I can see ourselves, yeah.
Okay, so now you can see a presentation.
Yep.
And there's a lady there.
That's it.
Okay, so indulge me if you will, okay, with a little bit of an origin story for geriatric medicine, because it's important about what we're going to speak to here. This is Marjorie Warren. She's one of the first geriatricians in the United Kingdom. She, to this day, is kind of one of the heroes of geriatricians around the UK. If you come to visit BGS headquarters in London, you'll be visiting Marjorie Warren House. Once a year, we give away the Marjorie Warren Medal, and this picture sits in pride of place above the board table at BGS headquarters. Marjorie Warren is important because she really tells the story of what's different about geriatricians and geriatric medicine. She was put in charge of a place called the Middlesex Infirmary, particularly part of that called Warkworth House. Back in the 1930s, this was a poor law infirmary where people who had fallen at the bottom end of society really went to stay until they died. This was a sort of predecessor to the welfare state. People rapidly became institutionalized and they very seldom went home. She was sort of given this as a consolation prize because despite her aspirations as a respiratory physician, it was felt that it would be most appropriate for a woman physician who just had children to not get ideas above her station, and she could just look after the Warkworth House. She decided to stick it to the man, as they probably didn't say in 1938, by going around every single patient resident at Warkworth House, assessing them, working out who needed rehabilitation, delivering rehabilitation, working out who needed palliative care, and ensuring that they got high quality palliative care. And at the end of 5 or 6 years working there, she was able to hand more than 200 beds back to the infirmary because it no longer needed all the bed capacity, because she showed that with effective rehabilitation and mobilisation, you could get people up and out and moving. What she exemplified there really was the beginnings of an approach which has come to be known as comprehensive geriatric assessment. We as geriatricians call it comprehensive geriatric assessment, but if I present this to general practitioners, they sometimes just say, well, that's good holistic general practice. Palliative care physicians sometimes just say that's good holistic palliative care. I think the point is it's the model of multidisciplinary holistic care, and we've called it comprehensive geriatric assessment, and we continue to call it that, or CGA for short, because there's a very substantial trial evidence base underpinning this. What's different about comprehensive geriatric assessment is not about establishing a diagnosis, doing tests, curing someone and sending them home. It's about doing a multi-domain assessment of physical, psychological, functional, social and environmental issues, putting in place an individualised management plan with treatment goals, or they could be rehab goals, reassessing their progress over time, and then going back to the beginning again. So it's iterative and it's case managed, and it's delivered by a multidisciplinary team. And the multidisciplinary team that I show at the bottom of the screen is quite typical for a hospital setting, with the nurse in the sort of chair position, but different configurations work in different contexts, and indeed different configurations of professionals work in different contexts. The main point is that you need a mix of skills and competencies, and it can't just be delivered by one professional group. Now, the evidence base for comprehensive geriatric assessment is very strong. This is something called a forest plot. If you're not familiar with it, I will explain to you in very simple terms how to analyse it. If something is to the right-hand side of the line, then it's more likely to happen. If something's to the left-hand side of the line, it's less likely to happen. Each of the horizontal lines represents a research trial that's been conducted, and the diamond at the bottom represents what happens when you pool the results of all of those trials together. This is looking at trials of comprehensive geriatric assessment for older people admitted to hospital compared with normal care, just diagnosis, treatment and discharge. And this is looking at how likely they are to be living at home 3 to 12 months after follow-up. And if you look at the diamond at the bottom, you can see that it's to the right-hand side of the line, and clearly to the right-hand side of the line, which shows us that people are more likely to be living at home 3 to 12 months after follow-up if they receive comprehensive geriatric assessment by comparison with usual care. If you click on the QR code in the bottom right-hand side, that will take you to the Cochrane review that this has come from. This is even more compelling data. This is looking at the likelihood that people will be admitted to a nursing home 3 to 12 months after CGA in a hospital setting. And you can see that the diamond's very clearly to the left-hand side of the line. That means that it's much less likely to happen. So people that get comprehensive geriatric assessment are less likely to be admitted to a nursing home than people who receive conventional care. And the number needed to treat for this is very small. You only have to see or do comprehensive geriatric assessment on 12 people in order to recognise this sort of level of benefit. This is at least as good as the effect of aspirin following an acute myocardial infarction. In fact, the number needed to treat is lower than for aspirin following an acute myocardial infarction. Now, if you move it into community settings, the evidence base is less good. So this is a Cochrane review. Again, you can click on the QR code there of comprehensive geriatric assessment for people that live at home, people who have severe frailty, high score on the electronic frailty index, who are community dwelling. What happens when they get comprehensive geriatric assessment? Now, this has been tabulated by the authors in a slightly different way, so I will explain it again. The most important column is the one third from the left, called relative effect. The numbers below that are what we call relative risks. If they're less than 1, then something is less likely to happen. If they're more than 1, then something is more likely to happen. But important are the numbers in the brackets. These are what we call confidence intervals. And if these sit either side of 1, then the result is not statistically significant. So if you look down through these results, the data from these studies done in the community suggest that people, if they get comprehensive geriatric assessment, there's a trend towards them being less likely to die, less likely to be admitted to a nursing home, less likely to be subject to an unplanned hospital admission, less likely to visit an emergency department, and less likely to experience a serious adverse event such as falls. But the confidence intervals are all very wide for all of those. So the only one that actually achieves statistical significance is unplanned hospital admissions. You might conclude from that, therefore, that comprehensive geriatric assessment works in hospitals but not in communities. But you can't, for 2 reasons. The first is if you look at the column second from the right, called certainty of the evidence, and you'll see that for most of those, it's moderate, low, or very low. This means not that these studies are conclusive, but just that they're very low quality studies. This is not absence of. This is not evidence of absence. This is not evidence that comprehensive geriatric assessment doesn't work. Rather, it's absence of evidence. It means that we haven't done enough studies of a sufficiently high quality to say that comprehensive geriatric assessment in the community doesn't work. Okay. Another important point is made in this paper here, which is a nice piece of work done by Ian Philp and colleagues. Ian Philp is currently the Chief Medical Officer at Hull in East Yorkshire NHS Hospital Trust. He's a geriatrician by background. And what he's done in this piece of work, you can follow it through in the QR code, is to look at the evidence for comprehensive geriatric assessment in hospitals and in the community. And what he shows very eloquently and elegantly in this is that the hospital interventions wouldn't work if they weren't connected up to stuff in the community. And often the reason that the stuff in the community doesn't work is that it's not well connected up to stuff in hospitals. So actually much more important in assessing hospital or community CGA is assessing whether or not things are connected up. Yep. Now, people at NHS England have often contested that this might not be very good evidence, therefore, for doing community comprehensive geriatric assessment. But let me show you what happens if you don't. And what happens if you don't is what we've got at the moment. This is data from the Nuffield Trust. This is looking at ambulance response times between January 2019 and January 2023. These are category 2 ambulance response times. It's supposed to be 18 minutes or less. Okay. What effectively has gone on here is that these have climbed and climbed and they have never come back down again. And this has actually continued to March of this year. We now have the worst ambulance response times that we've had on record. We have similar issues with waits in the accident emergency department. We now have the longest waits in accident emergency departments on record. And the same would go for almost any metric that I was to show you about acute hospital care. The one that probably hit the media the most was at the end of December, when 13,000 people who were medically stable for discharge were awaiting transfer of care into either rehabilitation or care homes in the community. To put that in some proportion, 13,000 is 1/10 of all the acute hospital beds in England were occupied by people that were medically stable for discharge but had nowhere to go. However you look at it, our system is providing the worst care that it ever has done. It's not a reflection on the work that we're all doing on a day-to-day basis. It's just a reflection on the fact that the system is overwhelmed. You're most likely to have an adverse consequence of this if you are old. This is data from the Royal College of Emergency Medicine that was published in The Guardian. This is accident emergency waits between 2021 shown in grey and 2022 shown in red. You can see that the over 80s are the worst affected. They waited on average 9 hours in accident emergency in 2021 and 16 hours in accident emergency departments in 2022. Remember that this is an average. The longest wait I've seen so far this year is 38 hours. So older people with frailty are supremely primed to be adversely affected by the system pressures that we see at the moment. We talk a lot about the failure of social care, the fact that care homes are struggling, the fact that domiciliary care is struggling, and that's why we can't get people out of hospital. But one of the things we really need to be critical about is how the NHS factors into this as well, particularly the failure of rehabilitation. I know you're all rehabilitation enthusiasts on the call, and you'd love to think that we all do a good job, but we don't always do a good job. I'm just about to present you some data from this thing. It's called the EU COGER study. It's not the COGER study, but the EU COGER study. COGER stands for Collaboration of Geriatricians. This was work done to look at rehabilitation following admission to hospital for COVID-19 in people aged 80 and over across Europe. What we did was we looked at them from the point of admission to hospital, looked at what rehabilitation interventions they got, and then looked at their outcomes. I don't want you to tweet the next slide, please, because it's just in the process of completing analysis and it's about to be published. But I'll explain to you what it shows because I think it's very illustrative. These graphs all show recovery trajectories for people that were admitted to hospital with COVID-19 across 4 separate countries. Each individual line on the graph represents an individual recovery trajectory for an individual patient. The score on the left-hand side, the y-axis, is a 20-point Barthel index, where 20 is functional independence in the Barthel index and 0 is complete dependency. If you look at the graphs for the Czech Republic, Germany or Ireland along the top, what you see is that people come into hospital, they have a dip in their Barthel index when they're either in the medical admissions unit, the respiratory ward or the intensive care department. And then what happens is they have a rapid recovery in their functional trajectory up to or close to where they were when they came into hospital. And that's the same in the Czech Republic, Germany and Ireland. Arguably better in Germany than in the Czech Republic and Ireland, but it's pretty clear for all those countries. If you look at the data from the UK, it's just a complete mess. It's all over the place. And most of those people don't return to baseline. I've been back in and had a look at what actually happened in those people that were admitted to what were nominally called rehab beds in one part of the UK that shall remain unnamed, and what effectively happened in those beds where no rehab took place. People went to the beds, they were there to receive rehab, but they didn't get much in the way of multidisciplinary team input. They waited for a few weeks, were handed a Zimmer frame, and then they were sent home. Now, I say that part of the NHS should remain unnamed, but from anecdotal feedback we get from BGS members around the country, this sort of thing is happening all over the place, and it's the fact that we spot purchase rehab capacity in places where we don't have rehab resource, and then people don't get any rehab as a consequence. So we know that rehab works, we know that comprehensive geriatric assessments works. We've had very good data about that since the 1930s when Marjorie Warren started. We've got Cochrane reviews now that show that, but we're not doing it within the system. And as a consequence of that, people are getting the worst care that they've ever received. So what I want to speak about for the last 10 minutes or so of my bit, before I hand over to Kate, is to tell you about this document here, which is the BGS blueprint, which is where the British Geriatric Society lays out its kind of system level thoughts about how we can recover from this situation and really embed reconditioning, avoidance of deconditioning, rehabilitation and recovery into how we deliver healthcare. At the front of the document, if you can get it on the QR code again, it's there, and you can also find it on the website, and you can tweet about it on the hashtag. At the front of the document, you'll find 7 touch points. And these are the things that we think are really values that have to be baked into how we deliver healthcare across systems in order to ensure that we deliver better care for older people. The first of these is recognising that we can't settle for lowest common denominator healthcare. It's not sufficient for us to get through the winter with the least number of deaths or the least amount of disability. We have to be focusing on returning people to full health and well-being and enabling independence. In order to do this, we need to be focused on population-based proactive anticipatory care. When NHS England announced its Ageing Well plan, it had 3 pillars, one of which was anticipatory care. The anticipatory care pillar of the Ageing Well plan is the only one which has not really been delivered in a systematic way at a national level. So we need to challenge ourselves at a local and a regional level to make sure that we actually do this. We need to make sure that all the services that we're involved in join up. So there are lots of examples in different parts of the country of things called urgent community response services, reablement services, rehabilitation services, or intermediate care services, but they don't connect with each other and people can't flow between them. And it's really important that we look at how these services flow and how people move between them in order to provide one coherent joined up response. We need to make sure that wherever older people are in hospital, whether it's in the intensive care department where Kate works, whether it's in the emergency department, surgical wards or medical wards, that they can receive frailty attuned acute hospital care where they're seen by experts and teams who know how to care for older people with frailty. We need to make sure that the Enhanced Healthcare and Care Homes initiative gets embedded around the country, but we also need to make sure that similar care is extended to older people with disability who live at home. And finally, we need to recognise that there's a role for palliative care and caring for older people with frailty. It's not as easy as it is in older people with cancer to recognise who's about to die. It's not as easy to provide structured care, but it's just as important, and we need to be investing energy and resource in this. Now, underpinning the 7 touch points, we have 12 recommendations, okay? And the first 3 of these focus around systems leadership, okay? Now, what do you need if you're going to have good systems leadership in order to deliver effective care for older people? Now, this could work whether you're an ICS or whether you're an acute hospital, in all honesty. You need to actually make sure that you have a vision and a strategy for delivering effective care to older people with ageing and managing frailty. If that's not in your organisation strategy, then it won't be able to effectively deliver this type of care. We need to make sure that someone at the top of the organisation, preferably a board member, is held responsible for effective care of older people. They're held accountable and that they can hold other people to account. And we need to make sure that people have good data. Now, we refer to this as a state of ageing report. What does a state of ageing report comprise? Well, there are no particularly good examples from anywhere in the UK at the moment that are published. But what this really means is look at where there's data on older people within your system, look at where there's outcome data on older people in your system, and pull it together so that people that are delivered in the care can actually understand whether they're doing a good job. Recommendation 4 stands by itself, and this is about focusing on prevention and management of frailty. And if you can't think about how to do this as a whole system focusing on frailty, a very good way to look at this is by making sure that you get dementia services and falls services sorted. If you start by focusing on those very, very tangible things which people can coalesce around, the principles that you initiate for them will extend to other groups with frailty. Recommendations 5 and 6 are really about training. Okay, I often get told by people, usually doctors, we're all geriatricians now because we all care for older people. To which my response is, yes, but do you know what you're doing? And I often get a kind of blank or slightly angry stare in response to that. But the point is, yes, we all care for older people, but we don't all know how to care for older people. So we need to make sure that wherever people are caring for older people with frailty, that they have the skills in order to be able to do so. And there's plenty of guidance online about how to deliver that, not just from the BGS, but from other organisations like Skills for Care. And then we need to make sure that we've got the right staff in place. And that's a little bit more complicated because it's, you know, we can make the jobs, but how do you find the people? And we can have a bit of a chat about that when we come to that point. Our workforce leader is actually Amit Arora, who's on the call, so he can answer any difficult questions that you want to ask about workforce when we get to that point. This one's important. I'm sure that everybody on this call will agree it, but we haven't recognised in systems that older people have a right to rehabilitation. If they start off with a degree of functional independence and they complete an illness episode with lower levels of independence, then they have the right to therapy in order to enable them to return to their pre-morbid functional level. They also have the right to hospital services that don't harm them and that maintain their mobility and that maintain their independence through the system. And we need to recognise that right when we're designing systems and services. 8 to 10 are all really about recognising the voice of older people within the system. Now, hearing the voice of older people is not always as easy as it is to write these things down on a PowerPoint slide. Older people frequently have mobility impairment, they have sensory impairment, they may have dementia, and so the people that we most need to hear from are often the people that we are least able to hear from. What we need to do is to make sure that when we are building our services, that we build supports in place so that we can reach out to patient groups, even those with cognitive impairment, mobility impairment and sensory impairment, to make sure that we hear their voice and we respond to what they really think, both about the services they're currently receiving and the services that they think they need. Recommendation 11 is just to remind us all that it's not just about healthcare. Yeah, we now work in integrated care systems. We're supposed to be able to move money around the system from health into social care into third sector organisations in order to support people better where they need it most. Perhaps it would be sensible, for example, to support some resource on community leisure centres in order to prevent deconditioning in the first place. Perhaps it might be useful to devote some resource to befriending services that are provided by the Red Cross. There's all sorts of different things that we need to be thinking about, and we need to remember that we're in joined up services, and every solution is not going to have a doctor, a nurse, a therapist, an ACP, or someone that we recognise as a healthcare professional at the helm. And the final point of the 12 is just an invitation, which is to say we're here as a community of 4,800 professionals working within the British Geriatric Society. If you're not already a member, come and join us. If you're not already a member and you don't want to come and join us, even despite our heavily discounted rates for non-medical members, he says, putting in a plug, then at least reach out and engage with us, because there's lots of expertise within the BGS that can help you navigate these issues on a day-to-day basis. The website alone is a wealth of resource, all of which is free to use and open access and readily shareable. Before I finish, I just wanted to make a point about rehabilitation potential. This is somewhat that comes from a PhD student that I supervised 4 or 5 years ago. She's now an associate professor in my department. Her name's Alison Cowley. She's a physiotherapist by background. She's one of the cleverest people I've ever met. And she did this piece of work around rehabilitation potential. She and I used to get really exercised about this when we worked in a day hospital. The day hospital doesn't exist anymore, but she and I continue to be exercised about this to this day. And that's it. We often hear that therapists say that older people won't go to rehabilitation places because they don't have rehabilitation potential. Alison did these 2 pieces of work. The first, a systematic mapping review. The second, a piece of feasibility work looking at a rehabilitation potential assessment tool. And what she showed was a lot of our decisions about who's got rehabilitation potential are much more subjective than we give ourselves credit for. And they're frequently influenced by things that we would not like to admit they're influenced by. So we will be more likely to decide that someone's got no rehabilitation potential if we know that there are no discharge to assess pathway 2A beds available for them to go to. So we just need to reflect on how it is that we make these decisions. Remember that right to rehabilitation. Challenge ourselves as individuals to perhaps give people more of a chance, and challenge the systems in which we work to make sure that we have enough capacity so that we're not adversely influenced in the decisions that we make. We'll be doing that on your behalf for the BGS, but I'm sure you can all do it locally, regionally and nationally on your own behalf. So to conclude, we need to move towards a better balance of proactive and reactive care. All of this needs to be underpinned by multidisciplinary, multi-domain assessment and management. I call it comprehensive geriatric assessment. You can call it whatever you want, so long as it's the same thing, tomato, tomato. How services join up is key, both vertical integration, hospital into community, community into hospital, but also horizontal integration, how different community services and different hospital services join up. We need enough skilled workforce with everybody in the team trained in field management. We need everybody to be working to the top of their competencies. I'm still not convinced it's very good use of therapist time for therapists to be going around and doing D2A pathway assessments when they could actually be leading rehabilitation teams in hospitals. I know lots of therapists who agree with me on that one, by the way, before you have a go at me. We need data on how the systems are performing. We need champions for care of older people within systems, and both of these things will help systems, hospitals, and ICSs keep focused on the task in hand. And we need all of this to be informed by the perspectives of older people and their carers, who need to remain at the heart of everything we do. They'll keep us honest, they'll keep us focused. We just need to listen. That's all I wanted to talk about. I think the format now is that I hand back to Nick, and then he tells us what happens next. So I'm hereby handing back to Nick.
Something like that, Adam. Yeah, thank you very much. That was really fascinating, and some of that data is just so powerful when it's shared like that. So thank you for that. It's a really different way to describe some what appears to be some very obvious factors that are with us, and sometimes challenges some of why aren't we doing more, because it just feels like the data is there to support that. So thank you for that. That'd be really that's really helpful. Excuse me, I put the clip of you with BBC Breakfast in the chat there, just in case anybody did miss it. I'm not sure anybody did miss it, because it was all over social media. So I shared it because I think it really is helpful to continue to share some of these messages broader than our bubble possibly, but outside our world to the wider audience. So I've put that in there as well to share beyond. So thank you very much for that. As you said, Kate, I'm sure we'll follow on with lots more great stories. So I'm going to shut up and let Kate get on with it. Over to you, Kate.
Hello everyone, my name is Kate. I'm a specialist sister in intensive care rehabilitation down in the southwest, and I'm going to try and share my screen now. So watch my data, watch my screen, and pray that it works. It's always good, isn't it? So I'm hoping you can see.
Yep,
perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the story of the Rehab Legend campaign, and I'm going to give you an example. I've got my colleague, sadly, isn't able to join us. She's one of our Rehab Legends down in the Southwest who volunteers with us as a team. She was meant to be presenting, but sadly she's had to go to another work commitment. So I'm going to be talking about her Rehab Legend work as a volunteer. And then I'm going to tell you my top tips of how we bring all of the stuff that Adam's talked about and all the stuff that I'm going to talk about patient stories, to be able to bring real action for all of our patients in all of the cohorts across of the concept of rehabilitation for all. So this is the story of the rehabilitation campaign, and so it starts off with a patient story, because I think all good things in the NHS and in care have to start with a patient story, and this is the story that inspired me to start the campaign and my work in rehabilitation. So I'm going to read it to you in her own words, because I think it's so moving. And when I first read it, I was moved to tears in a big intensive care office, because I had previously thought that intensive care nurses and intensive care teams could wear their pants outside their trousers because we save lives. And then in one patient interaction and in one moment, I realized that I was completely wrong, and I had completely and utterly missed the point. And her words are, "When I came home, I was barely able to walk. Physically, I had a long rehabilitation period ahead of me, with no support given. I was deeply traumatized by what had happened to me in intensive care. I had flashbacks and I couldn't make sense of what had happened. I had very confused memories from intensive care, some of which were from delirium and were unreal, but I didn't know which were true and which were false. I was also 12 weeks pregnant before my critical illness, so I was profoundly sad at the loss of that pregnancy. It felt like my life had been torn apart. 3 months after my illness, my husband had a nervous breakdown over what he had gone through while I was ill. It was after reading this story that I knew I had to build a service and a team in my department that could support ICU survivors and their loved ones. So I'm a research nurse by trade, and I'm an ICU nurse by trade. So I did the thing that I knew made me feel safe. I looked at the data, I built the data, and I did a master's in clinical research to prove that my patients had a rehabilitation need after intensive care. And this is explained beautifully by Dale Needham's work from 2011, looking at post-intensive care syndrome. And this is the combination of mental health problems, cognitive impairment, and physical impairment our patients have after intensive care. And clearly that has a significant impact on quality of life, but also the impact on families. So the lived experience of being with your loved one in intensive care is brutal. And I think for a very long time, we didn't really, we underestimated it. And we didn't really put all the pieces together of how challenging it was for families to reconnect and to rebuild and to rehabilitate afterwards. And so we know that in our family members, we have significant issues with mental health problems, which clearly has a big impact on quality of life. And quality of life this is the broadest term for this. This is clearly going to have social, economic, housing. I've spent all of last week on the phone to a council to try and get support from one of our long-term patients, so they weren't going to get chucked out of their house. This has significant impact. So what I did was I did a master's in clinical research to prove that there was a problem in the population, and I started to build a rehabilitation service. So I come at this at an angle from taking a patient story to collecting some data to building it into a business case. And I'm now really proud to be able to show you this team, and this team has taken me 5 years. So I've now got physiotherapy, we've got our own animal assisted intervention team, including Christmas miniature ponies. We've got a nursing team, we've got our own data team and a PhD student in partnership with the School of Computing in our local university. I've got a psychology team, one of the biggest psychology teams in the UK. I've got now 3 medical rehab, I've got 3 ICU consultants who have a rehabilitation role as part of their job. I've got a dietitian advert out, I've got occupational therapy, and I've got 2 speech and language therapists. And I can tell you absolutely hand on heart that when I started this, I never thought any of this was going to be possible. And now when we have team meetings, it just makes my heart explode that I have got a team that I know are doing the best for our patients who are making real differences. So what does rehabilitation in intensive care looks like? Well, it looks like this. It looks like getting people who, to be in intensive care, you've got to have an organ failure. So it's like getting people with organ failure up, ready, on their feet, doing as much activity as possible. So this is a gentleman who's clearly ventilated and has got an endotracheal tube in, and here he is stood up, putting weight through his legs, because we know that's going to have not only an impact on his cognition, his delirium, his muscle strength, muscle innovation. It just is so beautiful to see when it goes on. But also we humanize our care. We make it holistic rehabilitation care. So it doesn't matter. For me, what matters is that we're giving the patient back the thing that they want most. And in this case, the gentleman was really worried about his fine motor loss during being acutely unwell. So we worked on his rehabilitation goal was playing his guitar. And I can say that when he got his guitar that day and when he picked it up and he played it, the whole unit went silent. And if you know how busy intensive cares and hospital wards are, it's very rare that it's ever silent. And here's our therapy dog with one of our long-term patients. Looks like he's trying to eat the control, but I promise he's not. So I didn't realise the power of animal-assisted therapy and interventions until we had a therapy dog. I would try and motivate a patient to get out of bed. I'd bring along Hovis or Poppy, our therapy animals, and they would get out. They would be racing down the ward with frames, asking nursing staff, can they be got out early? We also have a rehabilitation garden space that we use in the Southwest to take our patients out, which allows us to bring family pets in, big family parties. We've got coronation parties ready this weekend, but we can bring other animals in that then our infection prevention and control team are happy with, but we can also optimize somebody's experience. So when we first started this whole process of building a rehabilitation team, it was new, and rehabilitation in intensive care was a new thing, and people didn't get as excited about it as I did, and people didn't really understand it. So I needed to show all of my team and all of my multidisciplinary team that people got excited about rehab and that rehab mattered. And so I needed to find a hook. I needed to find a way in. So this is a light box from Sainsbury's. It was £9 in 2018, and I bought it, and that's my kitchen table. You can see the tablecloth reflected back up. I bought a light box, and I decided that I was going to take a picture of everyone and anyone who had done anything to support rehabilitation in my patient group, to recognize the effort and the work and the success and how all of the little things that they do make a difference, whether that's holding somebody's hand in the middle of the night that allows them to sleep, whether that's washing somebody's hair that makes them feel back to themselves, whether that's supporting them to get out of bed, whether that's putting their socks on so they can walk, or getting their slippers in. It doesn't matter what, optimizing their nutrition, it doesn't matter what it was about recognizing the impact. And we started off with 50 badges, and I bought some patient specific badges, because what we wanted to do was I wanted to recognize patient stories and use patient stories as a way to enthuse, motivate, innovate, challenge, push. And so what we do is we share rehab legend stories from patients, staff and loved ones on social media. And this is one of our first patients with her patient bags. And I can tell you absolutely truthfully that every time I give a patient a badge, they cry, literally every time, because what we're really rubbish at doing in the NHS is saying thank you and well done. So I make it my business to say thank you and well done to everyone who I know, because I know everyone's working their socks off to really prove and really highlight and really emphasize how proud I am of the patient and their rehabilitation progress, but how proud I am of my staff and my colleagues and their loved ones to be able to support us with this journey. So for example, this week I gave out 2 Rehab Legend badges to the 2 grandsons of one of our long-term patients who have both been supporting and facilitating their grandmother do the stairs. And it was on for the strike days last week, and earlier this week, they just loved it. And apparently they were wearing their badges to school. So what we do with these patient stories is we watch them across the whole trajectory of recovery. So we follow these patients through. So this is the same lady the day she was decannulated. And this is some of the teams that helped her when she was up on the ward. So this is one of our respiratory wards. And this is recognizing that absolutely rehabilitation is a team goal. It's a team effort. It's a team sport. And without all of us, we are lost. We are a team. I'm going to share one more Rehab Legend story with you. This is one of our patients from before COVID. I always in my head work pre-COVID and BC and AC, before COVID and after COVID. This is a gentleman who had just a normal flu, just a normal flu. Doesn't look like a normal flu, does it? So here he is on his tummy because he's on 100% oxygen and he's acutely unwell. And the next day he was transferred up to the Brompton to have ECMO, which is extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. This is because his heart and lungs were so impacted by his inflammatory processes that he had to be put on specialist equipment to be able to support his oxygenation. And as you can see, here he is in February, and he's now on ECMO. The ECMO machine's at the bottom. He's fully ventilated. And at this point, he isn't filtered. But as you can see, in March, his kidneys are requiring some support as well. He's got a tracheostomy here. And here's his wife sat next to him all the time, and the lived experience of sitting through that. This is the day he came back to intensive care, back with us in the Southwest. And when he came back, he was just able to move fingertips, and he was just about able to blink properly, but he had lost pretty much all of his muscle strength because he was so acutely unwell. And he was also incredibly low because he felt that he had nothing left to offer his family, and he was very worried about the economics of him being so unwell for such a long time. And when I first met this gentleman, he absolutely just wasn't able to engage. He just couldn't see any future. So part of my job is finding people and supporting people to find their future and find the thing that is going to get them going again. And for him, it was his granddaughter, and that's his daughter there. So we have a garden, as I said earlier, and we had an Easter egg hunt with his grandchildren, and we sat him in his bed, wrapped up because it was cold, it was April, with hats and with silver blankets. And we had an Easter egg hunt and we played football. And it was at that moment that he realized that he was going to get better, because he had to get better because he had grandchildren that needed him. So what we do is we share these patient stories, and this is him taking his first steps when he's up on the ward. And I'm hoping that you're able to see the video working. And as you can see, he's working really hard. So what we did was we shared his story on Twitter, and we tried to tag in all the different teams that had cared for him in the two centres that he'd been in. And we wanted to really highlight how hard he'd worked and how proud we were, and how teamwork and multidisciplinary teamwork made the dream work. And what we were just thrilled about is, and this is the power of social media, is that the team that had cared for him up in the Brompton tweeted us back and said, thank you so much. This is the thing that we needed to see as a team, to know that rehab matters, to know that the work we do all together makes a difference. So what we do in the Rehab Legend campaign is we share stories to motivate, innovate and challenge, but to share the stories to prove that rehab matters and that your role in rehab matters, irrespective of what you are doing, whether you're giving somebody an extra lump of potato at lunchtime because that's the thing they've asked for because they're really hungry because they've done a rehab session, holding somebody's hand, it doesn't matter. But we have to close the loop, because we often don't close the loop. So acute teams might not know what happens at the end, so they don't know the impact that they've made. So we share these stories on social media, and we use these patient stories as part of our political stream, because the thing that we need to do is we need to, as a team, share patient stories with Adam's excellent examples about data. We need the data, yes, but we also need the stories, because unless you get somebody in a room and make them cry about how important rehabilitation is, it is very hard to engage them. So we must not underestimate the importance of patient stories, not only to support our staff in understanding that it is really important, but also to engage our key policy decision makers and our institutional bodies wherever we work. If we can prove that we make a difference and that all of these things come together in a beautiful symphony, then great things happen. So right at the beginning, I started this story with the story that started it. And the one thing that she asked for in her questionnaire was a follow-up service. And it's taken me years, but I've got it. And I wish that I was able to tell her that I've got the service and that we're making a difference for all of these patients. But it's not really good enough, is it, that one story led me to build this team? What we need to do as a team is make sure that all of us are pushing the same push, the same edict, the same life goal, that is rehabilitation matters, irrespective of how old you are, where you live. It matters, and we have to get people back to the thing that they most want to do, whether that's drinking a beer in their garden or playing with their grandchildren or doing a puzzle. It doesn't matter. What matters is that we're giving people back to themselves. So I'm really proud that I've been able to build this service. But now the key thing that we have to do is we have to continue to use all of the things that Adam's just talked about, which is policy development, which is, you know, and making sure we've got joined up services, making sure we've got specialist rehabilitation teams, making sure we've got interprofessional teams, making sure we're keeping the patient at the heart of all of the things we do. But if we use patient stories as an adjunct to what we're trying to do, I think that we have a real advantage to be able to get the right people in the room at the right time. So these are my slides ending, and I wonder if somebody could share the other slide deck, and I'll happily talk through Lou's slides. So this is Louise's story. Lou is one of our Rehab Legend volunteers, but also she was in intensive care herself, which makes it so incredibly powerful. Next slide, please. So Lou was in intensive care because she was in intensive care, in neurointensive care, for 5 days, and that's because she had a complication as part of a surgical procedure, which ended up her being septic and very unwell. And she is with us and is now working both in the hospital as a Rehab Legend volunteer, but also in our intensive care population. So the rehab volunteer role has four main parts of it. One is nutrition and hydration, so supporting patients with optimizing their nutrition, because nutrition is a key part of recovery. Exercise and mobility and rehabilitation, so taking personalized rehabilitation plans and working with them, with patients, so they're able to do their in-bed and in-chair exercises. This is not a physiotherapy intervention. This is a supporting patients with independent exercise programs that they have been prescribed. This is supporting patients with communication, so contacting their loved ones. And this is especially important during COVID. Even things like charging mobile phones and making sure patients are digitally active, because without your digital device, if your digital device is uncharged, you're very isolated in hospital, and it can be an incredibly challenging experience. And the other thing is being a conversation partner and supporting patients with off-ward recreation. So lots of our volunteers support our patients. I have an ice cream budget, so we have a budget where the volunteers can pick a patient up, get them in a wheelchair, and then take them down to the garden and support them with eating their favorite or drinking their favorite thing or having a time with their loved ones. So it feels like, and I often people, I think, take the mickey out of me sometimes saying I'm quite a fluffy nurse because I do all the fluffy stuff. But I think unless we get the fluffy stuff right, and unless we get people engaged in rehab, they're not going to want to do the sessions that we're asking them to do. So the power of a clippo should never, ever be underestimated. Next slide, please, Jennifer. So how did she become a volunteer? If you click all the things, she's very good. So she was admitted in November 2018. She had a significant amount of delirium, and she understands completely the importance of a rehabilitation story because she's done it. And that means that it's a really, really, really great way to engage patients, because I can go along and I can say, this is really rubbish and this is really hard and I've got experience of this. And they won't believe me because I'm a healthcare professional. So I think sometimes it's really useful having a patient there being able to tell their story, to be able to share exactly how challenging it was. Lou has had real challenges with PTSD and is now the most amazing, vocal, wonderful advocate for the importance of supporting patients with post-traumatic stress, and shares her patient's story about delirium. She writes a blog, and she has From Delirium to Reality. And if you're interested in seeing the animation of her delirium experience, which is incredibly powerful, you can get that on the BBC with a From Delirium to Reality. Next slide, please. And this is her in the garden when we opened. So what does she do? She supports patients in a unique way. She's a patient advocate. She shares her stories. She shares her delirium experience, and she provides living proof. She also supports us with the political work that we're doing with the Intensive Care Society, and is sitting with the Intensive Care Society Clinical Reference Group as a patient advocate. So really, as Adam said right at the beginning, embedding patient experience in the heart of what we're doing, because if we do that, we will never, ever, ever go wrong. If you listen and learn, you will never go wrong. Next slide, please. So what are we doing next? We're trying to expand the team. We've now got up to 50 hours of Rehab Legend volunteers, and these are all volunteers. And actually of our volunteer team, a good 70% are now looking for jobs in the NHS, which I'm really proud of, because it's about growing our own succession planning and getting people into the team that we know will be able to support. And we're trying to do some more national work with supporting volunteer roles. But it is all about doing the little things right. So here's in the heart is we do a lot of work on hand massage, because often if I can get a lady a manicure on the ward, or a gentleman, doesn't matter, if I can get somebody's nails done, often they'll be that bit more engaged, because hands are very important, because they're the thing you look at a lot. And actually we judge people a lot by how their hands look. So we spend a lot of time supporting patients. And now Lou is looking for a career change to come and join us as an occupational therapist. So all of our resources are on rehablegend.com, all of our patient stories, all of our letters from patients to be able to support you with your recovery. Her blog is there, from delirium to reality, and you can follow Lou and myself on our hashtags. So we're very welcome to take questions, and Lou is very sad that she wasn't able to be here today.
Brilliant, Kate. I think there's some really, really helpful challenge there, I think, to, you know, and I think when I spoke to, it's a little bit provocative, but I'm going to say it now. I think when I spoke to you, what I took away was, if you can do it in ITU, surely you can do it anywhere, because what you're showing is that, you know, with all the complexity, complications of that environment, you're still managing to get patients up and moving in a very difficult situation. I think that's a challenge possibly to others, you know, and Adam was talking before about certain places around the country which you know, rehab just isn't happening for patients. I think, really, why, you know? And I get there are many challenges in the NHS at the moment, workforce being one of them. And what you're showing there is that where there's a will, there's definitely a way to do it.
I think if you can show staff, and actually, so for me, it's really important that we do not underestimate the impact on staff it has to be able to support the patient in getting the thing, that getting back to their baseline or getting back to their goal. But actually, if we don't complete the loop, if we don't share those rehabilitation stories, staff don't know, staff don't realise, staff don't see the impact that they have. So I would say that it is challenging, but actually rehab is fun. And if you can bring fun into any workplace, it has a significant impact on burnout, and it has a significant impact on morale. So like, I joke, and I know I get called the fluffy nurse, but I do, you know, we had miniature ponies at Christmas, we had miniature ponies at Easter. And to be honest, our therapy animals have as much of a staff role as they do a patient role, because we need to make sure that being at work is fun and we're able to support patients to have fun. So if a rehab session isn't fun, you're not doing it properly enough. It should be fun for everybody. Using music, you know, I'm trying to think of, I've been listening to bad 80s power ballads all week, trying to think of how I can do a big power ballad for the summer with some 80s headgear, with patients doing exercises on the wards, but I can't come up with a good enough song. So if anyone come up with a good enough song, I'd be lovely to hear it. But I think it has to be fun. Rehab has to be fun, and we have to prove that it makes a difference for everybody, for staff and for patients, which is why I love sharing patient stories.
Yeah, and it's a very powerful story you've shared, and I think I've heard you speak three or four times now, and it's still exactly the same powerful impact. Jen, Zoe, anything in the chat, or any comments in the chat that you want to pick out?
No, there's no specific questions in the chat, but a huge amount of kind of appreciation for sharing kind of the inspiration of the stories, and to both Adam and to Kate for really helpful things. I've got a quick question, Kate, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course.
Your follow-up service, who provides it, and how have you kind of funded it? Have you managed to get extra funding for it? Because I think it's a fantastic idea, and it would be great to see that go wider.
Do you mean the volunteer service, or do you mean our inpatient follow-up service?
The inpatient follow-up service.
So the inpatient follow-up service, we had to go to specialist commissioning for, and I regularly have to promise a lobe of my liver to be able to get it continue to be funding, which is really challenging and frustrating, and we have to continue to push and continue to write business cases. And so that's why all of Adam's point about the importance of using the documentation that we've already got, use the BGS guidance, get yourself a non-exec director, and get yourself get yourself heard at the right levels with the right people at the right times, share the data, share the patient experience, and share the economics. I don't think we should underestimate the importance of economics in this argument as well, because if you can bring the economic argument and it becomes like a perfect triad, you have real capacity to make change. And it is frustrating and it is tiring, and you have to have a level of resilience that is quite challenging. That's why you need a big team. It's great coming on calls like this because it means that, you know, we're all in it together and we can all help each other. And I think that's why social media is so great. And it's so great to have such great, you know, figures leading this, pushing this, and not, you know, not accepting that it's not good enough. The standard we walk past is the standard we accept. And I do not accept that rehabilitation is not, I'm not prepared to accept it. And it's great to be on calls when everyone's like, nope, it's not good enough for my grandma, therefore it's not good enough. Rant over, sorry.
It's a really helpful. It's a perfect point to make. Is it is often about a community, about a movement almost. We always describe this as more of a movement than a project or an initiative. This is about how you create movements, and that fun is at the heart of that as well, because you know you're not going to get any movement unless you're going to bring some fun into it. It all becomes very boring and very mundane. That fun. Zoe.
It was just a really quick question, because actually we've seen the power of the stories of when we've got it right. So I suppose a quick question really back to Adam about the recommendations from the joining the dots. You know, when will some of this be mandated? So it will be measured. So organisations will have, you know, a senior officer or board member supporting our, you know, our elderly patients, and give them their voice within organisations, I suppose.
Well, you know, it will be, I suspect, a mixture of mandate and coalition of the willing, to be honest. You know, so the dialogue around anticipatory care last year was informative. BGS had a dialogue with NHS England and said, you know what, so you might not know the background. The background is that there was initially a significant number of millions of pounds pledged to support anticipatory care for older people last year, which didn't get spent on care of older people last year. When we pushed NHS England on that, their assertion was that ICSs need to get on and do this by themselves. Yeah, so I think there'll be a certain amount of stuff that we need to have mandated for the centre, and we are pushing for stuff to be mandated and to be put in formal specifications from the centre. There's a certain extent to which we need to not wait for that, but rather just get on and do it ourselves within our systems. And you know, I think the same arguments that hold water at the centre sometimes will hold water in the regions and in our areas sometimes, which is, you know, the evidence base for what we're doing is pretty solid. The evidence base for what we've just done last winter is pretty overwhelming that it will result in rubbish outcomes. If we keep doing what we've always done, we're going to get what we've always got. So we need to change. And if you look at where there's evidence for change, the sort of things that I've been describing are very clearly areas where there's evidence for change. I think there is a change in the mood music from NHS England. They are seeing rehab as more of a priority. They have a national clinical lead, Jenny Keane, who's come and spoken to you for intermediate care for the first time ever. I think that's about, you know, putting their kind of money where their mouth is and actually showing that this does matter to them. So, you know, I hope that manifests in mandates, but don't wait for the mandates, just get on and do it anyway.
Yeah, that's the message to leave it with. Let's just get on and do it anyway, because it is and it comes down to, as Adam says, just the more about the willing people rather than a policy, and that's why we got people who are doing some really great stuff around the country. I'm going to bring us to a close. We're almost coming to 2 o'clock now, so thank you everybody for your time. Adam, Kate, thank you so much for your time again today. Really inspirational messages and bringing our learning event series to an appropriate end, which is really helpful. Really clear messages there for us just to take away. Last message for me is really that we bring our first phase of the reconditioning games to a close on the 15th of June at our closing ceremony. Invites are out and are out on Twitter quite a lot. Stress that this is the first phase closing, not the complete closing. We want to see this continue beyond the formal structure of the games, and how you guys and everybody else around the country continue this work going forward and develop your own games in your own organisations, and all the materials and medals and everything else will still be available to you beyond June 15th. But please join us at the closing ceremony if you can. But for now, Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of the day and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Adam and Kate.